Welcome to the first episode of Boston Leaders Unplugged, the new Jewish Community Relations Council podcast, where we will be talking with leaders who are shaping the conversation and the work in Greater Boston that is of interest to the members of our Jewish community. And I am really, really thrilled that the first guest we have on this podcast is the practically brand new Consul General of Israel to New England, Benny Sharoni. Well, let's get into it. I mean, you have been in the United States for a fair amount of the last decade. You've had some interesting experiences in D.C. where you were the political...
Yeah, I was a Minister Counsel for Political Affairs.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself or our audience here in the community here in Boston, both in the Jewish and the broader community, to say a little bit about yourself and why you decided to accept, along with your family, this posting again in the United States for the third time in a decade.
I don't think it's a call for explanation. This is the best place in America. So I don't need to convince any of the audience why Boston is such a great place. But first thing first. So I'm a career diplomat. I've been with the Foreign Ministry in the last 21 years. And this is our second tour in the United States. We were posted in Washington, D.C. between 2016 and 2021. Where I was working part of the political department of the embassy, dealing mainly with the relations with the government, with the White House, with the State Department, and other governmental agency. I'm here with my wife and our two daughters. We just arrived a couple of weeks ago, and so far so good.
A piece of advice, and I say this as someone not originally from Boston who moved here 13 years ago for this job. Everybody in Boston loves to be told that we're the best place to live. It's an obvious place to come to. We all love to be told how exceptional we are.
Yeah. Well, you convinced me.
Everybody's going to tell you that you have to root for our sports teams. You don't have to root for our sports teams. Yeah. It doesn't hurt, but we also understand if you stay true to what you actually, your teams that you're with. Yeah. As long as you play along and hate the teams we hate. Yeah. So that's key.
So this is funny because the first thing I learned about Boston was, I think it was early 80s. I was at elementary school back then. And the big thing in sports at my elementary school was either you were with the Boston Celtics or the Los Angeles Lakers. I was thinking about the days of Larry Bird. And I was definitely on the Boston Celtics side back then. So that was my first introduction to Boston. I learned much more about Boston in later stages of my life, but that was my first introduction, and I stayed loyal.
Okay.
So I've been a Celtics fan ever since then. This city has one leg deep in the custom, the tradition, the history of the modern United States, the Freedom Trail, and many things that are so important, and the development, the evolution of the United States happened here. But at the same time, it has another leg of research and development and cutting-edge technology and universities. And so to me, that was a fascinating combination where you have both old and new. Also in this regard, it reminded me a little bit of Israel, because in Israel, on one hand, it's a very ancient place, right? Everything there is biblical, right? You throw a stone, you hit a prophet grave. And at the same time, Israel is a startup nation and a place for technology and new things. So I thought, this interesting combination that you can find both in Boston and you can find also in Israel can serve as a beautiful bridge to trying to bring people together, to do things together. I said, okay, let's do that. Let's try to go for this challenge.
You've opened up a lot of doors that I want to sort of explore what's behind them while we're sitting here together. And I think people are interested to know sort of how you're thinking about the sort of the startup nation or the partnership that goes back and forth economically, technologically. So many companies here in Boston and Cambridge, for example, and their relationship in Israel. And we see that every time I go to Israel, we have the opportunity to see companies that are looking to branch out to North America and are looking at this as a region for that opportunity because of that.
Sure.
You've raised a lot of issues about how the history of Boston and the Freedom Trail, though I will say we take a lot of civic leaders to Israel. And one of the things we always prepare them for is here we talk about ancient, and ancient is in the relative scheme of America, it's like the 17th century. And here's the old state house from 1725, 1750, whatever. And then of course you come to Israel and 1750 is yesterday.
Yeah, it's yesterday.
And I think it's interesting to unpack that difference of sort of the longitudinal nature of history. Yeah. But before we go there, and I think this is partially because I think people here want to get to know you. You know, we have a new consul general that comes through every 3-5 years. It's a new relationship, both with the Jewish community and with civic leaders beyond the community. You're here with the family.
Yes.
What is it like to be a diplomat assigned abroad, to be raising a family abroad? What are you thinking about in terms of not success as being the consul general, and we'll get to that and what you're looking at, but success in terms of your family having a home here over the next several years?
I'm 20 years with the Foreign Service, but only half of it married with family. So it is only in the last 2 postings abroad that we have to face some of the challenges around that. I will say that this is an interesting balance. On one hand, and I'm representing here the way that my family thinks about it and feels about it, it offers great opportunities. The opportunity to spend a couple of years abroad outside of your natural habitat, to meet new people, new cultures, getting exposed to different ways of doing things, different ways of learning, different way of interacting with people, learning new languages. This is all fascinating things. And I think maybe the same way that I'm fascinated about that, maybe there's something contagious about that, because my wife and my daughters share more or less the same approach. And I'm happy to say that over the last weeks that we are here, they are embracing each and every new experiment that they're coming across. So this is just great. Now, it's not completely without challenges, but we try to look at the overall picture. And I'm really happy to say that our experience as a family have been so positive in the last couple of weeks.
I would imagine some of that has to do with what it means to experience sort of events as an Israeli, as a Jew, in Israel, in a certain bubble versus in a different bubble. And part of you references to work is the relationship, the partnership, and obviously there's a lot that's been going on here. There's a lot that's been going on there in recent months that is being understood or interpreted differently. And obviously you're arriving here in what has been a very difficult year.
Yeah.
And we are only a month away from it being October 7th. And it's hard to wrap our heads around the idea that it's been a full year since those horrific events. And I don't think this is a political statement, would have imagined that we would be where we are today in terms of the number of hostages that are still in Gaza, dealing with the challenges for Israel and for Jews around the world that we are dealing with here 11 months later. And I know that there must be something different about experiencing that as an Israeli living in Israel, now as an Israeli living and raising a family in Boston. And it's different for American Jews. And American Jews are a diverse bunch. And here in Boston, you're going to be consul general in a community. 10% of the community are Israeli Americans. We're very proud of the fact that we are a relatively integrated community and that the Israeli Americans play a leadership role in our community. So I imagine you're thinking about how to have these conversations with American Jews, Israeli Americans, with American civic leaders beyond the Jewish community.
This is still an open and bleeding wound for the people of Israel, for the Jewish people all around the world. I don't recall a greater Israeli trauma since the establishment of the State of Israel. I don't recall a bigger Jewish trauma since the Holocaust. And this is something that affects all of us. It affects the very daily lives of each and every Israeli. The magnitude of what happened is by all means not just limited to the ongoing war. There is no single element of the lives in Israel that has not been affected by what happened over the last year, be it economic and education and social, you name it. When I'm engaging with people here, first I see a lot of empathy, which is really, really encouraging. And it is very easy to feel the brotherhood, the camaraderie, that people are demonstrating towards Israel, towards Israeli, towards their Jewish brothers and sisters. It's very emotional to see, and it is very important for me as an Israeli to experience that, because I can relay that to my people back home, that this is the sentiment that I'm coming across. I'm seeing my job here is first and foremost to give my own personal testimony of how did I felt and feeling nowadays as an Israeli, and what my fellow Israelis are feeling about the October 7th. And I'm trying to focus on that. I understand there might be, different views or more complicated views, but I'm focusing on what I know, what I feel, what I can bring to the table.
One of the things we're very proud of here in Boston as a Jewish community is the depth of our local Jewish community's connection to Israel. And I'm not saying that other American Jewish communities are not deeply connected to Israel, but I would say this, growing up in New York, if I was hanging out with other 20-somethings in New York and we talk about what our time abroad was in Israel, and I lived in Israel for 2 years in the 80s as a student, might be talking to a friend. I was in Jerusalem. I would say to a friend, I spent 2 years in the 80s in Jerusalem. And they would say, oh, I did a gap year in Haifa. And you would look at them and say, oh, you're from Boston. And there's that's the nature of the Boston community. We know how deep that Haifa relationship is,
yes.
How so many families in our community have a personal relationship with somebody, personal relationship in Haifa, personal relationships across the spectrum in Israel. Everybody here knows people who were killed on October 7th,
yes.
who are certainly no more than 1 degree of separation
yes.
from people who were taken hostage. It feels very personally. And I don't know that Israelis always understand this, that Americans at large, and even here in Boston, about how deep that relationship is, because Americans at large don't typically travel abroad. Like less than half of Americans own a passport. Yeah. And most of those people only go to Canada, Mexico, and the Caribbean.
From an Israeli perspective, this is inconceivable,
Well, right.
Half of the people having passport doesn't make sense.
And that's actually, by the way, it was less than a third, not even 10 years ago. So it's like Americans are not accustomed to traveling abroad. And I think one of the things we've been challenged to help our neighbors see this year is how deeply personal October 7th was for us as a community. And it wasn't just something over there that we actually knew people, because it's a different experience for them. And I wonder how you're thinking, and you mentioned this a little bit in what you just said. You were talking about both representing a personal experience as an Israeli, and you also represent the government of Israel. And those can at times be two different hats to wear. How you're thinking about the work you're going to be doing with leaders in this region beyond the Jewish community in the weeks ahead, in the months ahead, to convey what you and what the government of Israel are experiencing as a government and as Israeli people, as two different sort of slightly overlapping, or mostly overlapping sometimes. I don't know. That's interesting.
To me, there are no dichotomies.
Okay.
Here. I'm representing a state. I'm representing a government. I'm representing first and foremost the people of Israel. And these people, our people, they have a story. They have a vision. They have a message. They have a narrative to be told, to be shared. And, that's my job. I'm bringing that here. I know that often not everybody, agrees with the Israeli government or with Israeli policy. That's okay, Not everybody is in full agreement with U.S. policies, with U.S. government. But still, I feel there is a very strong story to be told here. And this is the first and foremost what I'm interested in doing, bringing the perspective of Israelis and, present it here. Let the people, hear, think, ponder.
Well, it's certainly true that we as Americans are not a people of one mind on anything at this point. And certainly that better than most observers, having been a political minister here from, 2016 to 2021?
Exactly, yeah.
So you've seen a lot of change and discourse and fracturing in our politics in your time here.
My first posting abroad was in Egypt. 2006, 2009. I was the political counselor, focusing mainly on Egypt's foreign policy, including its relations with Israel and the neighborhood, and also domestic politics. Hosni Mubarak, was the president, and everything seems to be stable. I'm saying that because, shortly after I left, we witnessed the Arab Spring. I remember that one of the very first impressions I got while serving in Cairo was the huge amount of Egyptians don't know anything about Israel beyond just the question of the conflict. And I think also Israelis don't know that much about the Arab world beyond the conflict. That was my reaction. That was my feeling back then. And it was very interesting because I used to, take taxis, and often the driver asks you, where are you from? And often I said, yeah, I'm from Israel, because it interested me to see how they will react. Whether they say, okay, stop the car, get off, because I'm not taking Israelis with me. By the way, never such a thing ever happened. And I was curious to see how they're going to react to the fact that they are taking Israeli. And the most common expression was, wow, I never met an Israeli. And you can see you can sense that they were intrigued and fascinated, and sometimes even surprised, because my sense that they were, expecting a demon to step into their taxi. They were shocked to a certain extent, and it was a very interesting experience. Now, I think I was sent there for the political job, but this is a side story. They asked me to fulfill also the functions of the cultural attaché.
Okay.
Now, culture is a big issue in the relations between Israel and Egypt, because there was a kind of a cultural ban imposed in Egypt, where people felt that this is not official by the government, but the general sentiment was that, doing anything on the cultural sphere with Israel can be considered as normalizing the relations, and normalizing the relation has become a synonym with a very bad thing. So nobody was interested in, being coined as a one who normalized relations with Israel. And doing cultural work, that's about bringing people together and, sharing cultures. And so it's by all means, normalizing the relations, not just between government and states, but between nations and between people. So our work on cultural has been extremely difficult. And I remember that was more or less when a new Israeli film was released, The Band's Visit, mocks equally Israelis and Egyptians and everybody else. So we felt that this is great, right? It goes beyond politics. It's about people, right? But the fact that it's an Israeli movie was just strong enough, and it was banned from being presented in Egypt, regardless of its artistic merit or anything else. Now that gave us an extra incentive. So okay, now we want to present it anyway. We truly believe in the power of culture and the power of cinema, of bringing people together, because it's a wonderful movie. Half of it takes place in Arabic. You don't even need to translate. We used meetings that addressed political issues in order to raise that issue as well. And after a couple of such meetings, eventually we were, granted with the option of screening that movie in Egypt. And that was the first time that I know of that an Israeli film was screened in a public screening in Egypt since the signing of the peace agreement between
That's incredible. And it is a funny movie. And I have to wonder, as I'm listening to you, I know you have spent time in this country, you know this country more than some of your colleagues who've been here. It's not your first assignment here. That story, cultural boycott, is a real live issue here. And you're coming to a community and a part of the country where there have been many campuses over the last year that talk about boycotting academics or refusing to engage. There's certainly been issues around cultural institutions here that don't want to platform Israelis. On a personal level, and I'll be a bit of a nerd, there's an interesting dynamic that I have actually been speaking publicly about the whole idea of Shira Haas's appearance in an upcoming Marvel movie. But folks here know that I'm a little obsessed with my comic books. And there is a real pushback, and there's a real battle that is being fought in this country, not dissimilar from what you were describing about in Egypt, and the idea that somehow Israelis cannot be seen as normal human beings. Israelis cannot be seen as part of an international conversation about culture and academia. And I'm wondering, one, what you reflect upon that about us as America and where we're at, and how you're going to be approaching that. And then maybe we'll talk a little more broadly about what you're hoping to do during your time here as Consul General.
Yeah, I must say, if there is one thing that makes me angry, is the fact that in many places, when the question of Israel comes on the agenda, this is immediately about the conflict. Now, I'm not putting aside the conflict. There is a conflict. But Israel is way more than just a conflict. It's a flourishing economy. It's a thriving cultural scene. It's technology. It's so many things. Even if you don't agree with Israel policies, and I would argue very strongly against not even listening to what Israel has to say. To me, this is just the opposite of being liberal or taking a very liberal approach. Because liberal approach, I think, you should listen to anyone. You can take your own opinion by the end of the day. That's okay. I'm not here to dictate to anyone. But people who refuse to listen or refuse to, judge by their own experience, I would argue against that. And I'm going to invest a lot of my time in reaching out to different audiences and, telling the story of Israel with all its complexity. Yes, it's complicated. I agree. Who's not complicated nowadays? Everybody's complicated. No, but we have our complexities, and that's true. People hear, listen, then form their opinion.
I'm smiling because I can hear every alumni of our study tours to Israel. 2 or 3 times a year, we take civic leaders to Israel. Beyond the Jewish community, a lot of elected officials, probably half of our state legislature has come with me over the last decade. I'm smiling because I bet every one of them just cracked up laughing if they're listening to this when you said complexity, because we always it's complicated.
Yeah.
That's the number one thing we start with is it's complicated, hold the complexity. and you talked about sort of a liberal society and a critique which we could probably spend hours unpacking of this current state of liberal society, not just in the United States, but across the democratic world. And it's a real problem. Is one of the critiques and one of the challenges is the unwillingness to hold complexity. Everything has to be seen. Everything is getting mapped on to very simplistic paradigms. And I think that's a challenge we're grappling with. I know it's a challenge that Israel as a nation is grappling with in the international scene. For our audience, and I'm guessing most people, because we are Bostonians and we definitely think, I shouldn't say we think, we know that we are the hub of the universe. But I guess a lot of people probably don't even realize that you are the Consul General for 6 states, for all of New England.
Yes.
And so I'm mentioning that for our audience to know that, and also to invite you to say what your goals are and what you're hoping to achieve as Consul General during your time here.
I would like to focus on a couple of things. First of all, I would like to continue in the footsteps of my predecessor. I'm not inventing anything here. Continue to build and further expand the network of relations between the State of Israel and the 6 New England states. I have a mandate for Jerusalem to work closely with local politicians, either those who are representing New England in the Senate and on the Hill in Washington, local politicians, mayors, governors, attorney generals, you name it, everyone who has a say in the political arena. And this is in order, again, to expand the network of relations, present, the way we are seeing things, and inquire about what are the priorities that local politicians are facing, and maybe finding common denominators, maybe finding things that we can do together. I know that people here are concerned by questions related to housing, in healthcare and transportation and environment. And let me assure you, Israel is equally concerned with those challenges as well. Yes, we have, more on the security, military side of challenges. Those needs to be addressed as well. But besides those, immediate security challenges, we are also a state that is concerned with what to do with our waste, where to bury it, or maybe there is a better ways to recycle that. Maybe there are better ways to utilize the trash that we are producing. So I would like to use those priorities in order to find things that we can do together. That's one thing. Another thing is that there's a very strong, vibrant Jewish leadership here, supportive of Israel. You mentioned the very important trips that JCRC and others are doing every year to Israel. And I would like to work closely with the Jewish leadership here, even bringing us closer together, especially, given the last year events. And there is a huge economic potential here. Boston being the biggest hub in America, maybe the biggest hub in the world when it comes to biotech and life sciences, and the largest amount of labs in the United States are here. You see here a concentration of so many high tech and healthcare, and where health meets high tech, you can find some strong advantages in the Israeli tech industry. And I would like to use my time here in order to support as much as I can, bringing those community closer together, support cooperation projects, be it commercial or non-commercial. It's one thing to go in a meeting with the governor and say, well, I'm the representative of a foreign entity here. I'd like to, I come to say hello, let's shake hands. But it's another thing of saying, yeah, I'm a representative of another country. But there are some very interesting, promising solutions made by Israeli high-tech companies that might fit some of the challenges that you guys are facing here. So let's try to do that together. Let's think about a joint economic seminar or, things like that.
One of my favorite stories from when we've taken local elected officials to Israel was a couple of years back. We took a group of city councilors and others from the city of Boston, and we were in Tel Aviv City Hall, and they get to talking. And this member of the Tel Aviv City Council, they ask him, what's the number one thing you're working on the Tel Aviv City Council? And he starts to complain about parking.
Yeah.
And the parking issues in Tel Aviv. And you just saw the lights come on in these Boston City Councilors' eyes, like, oh, if we're going to talk about solutions to parking, we have a lot to learn from each other, and we can share. And I think one of the most important things that comes back to something we touched on before, like getting beyond the conflict. It's not the only thing on the agenda. It's not the only part. It shouldn't even be the only part of the conversation about Israel and Israelis. And, as you said, there's so much we have here to learn about what Israel is doing around environmental issues and the opportunities in a country that has our own challenges that we're so vast and great we didn't have to deal with for a long time around water resources or garbage and recycling that Israelis are just decades ahead of us on. I just think there's so many opportunities for you to interact and bring these two audiences together in ways that are yes, there's a conflict and there's a challenge, and there are a lot of people who have ideas about how the conflict has to be solved, but there are a lot of other things as well, from cultural to parking. How can we be helpful? How can we be supportive of you? Because, we want you to be successful in your time here in Boston, and we want the relationship between Massachusetts and Israel to be only strengthened over the years ahead.
First, I would say that it makes me very emotional to see how wide the support for Israel in Boston and in Massachusetts, in New England in general, is. It's heartwarming. Keep on doing whatever you were doing before, and you did even more after October 7th. The support that you expressed is so important for Israel and for Israelis, and this just keep on doing that. So this is the first thing. Second thing, visits and visits and visits. There is no alternative. There is no better way to understand the complexity of Israel, the advantages of Israel, the vibrancy of Israel without getting to Israel. For sure, for those who never visit, be those, members of the Jewish communities or local politicians or local influencers, you name it. Keep on investing in visits in Israel, because this is extremely important, and I think it tells the story. And I would say the third thing is, let your pro-Israeli voice continue to be heard. Don't be shy. I know that you are not shy about that. I think it is extremely important, especially nowadays when there are so many alternative voices around here, that we shouldn't be shy in supporting Israel. And yes, you guys and others, potentially have sometimes, criticism on point A or point B, and that's okay. Even within the family, we have disputes every once in a while, and it's good, it's healthy.
If anything has been clear this last year, the strength of that solidarity, the passion that members of our Jewish community have for standing with Israel and the Israeli people is second to none, and something I am just astounded by every day, going out and seeing all the members of our community who are standing up. And frankly, all of our partners beyond the Jewish community here. It hasn't been everybody, but it's been a lot of people, and we certainly have seen it, and we appreciate it. And I, for one, am very much looking forward to working with you in partnership and to being supportive of your success. I know all of us here are looking forward to the many ways we're going to get to work together over the coming year.
Well, I cannot think of a better way to conclude the first month than this wonderful opportunity. Before we conclude, I know you're a big fan of superheroes.
Rumor has it.
So I brought you something that, has a little bit of everything. So let's take this one out. This is a nice little figurine of Golda Meir, who used to be Israel's foreign minister and then later on the prime minister of Israel in the late 60s and the early 70s. And she used her term both as a foreign minister and as a prime minister to work on making sure that U.S. and Israel are closer. You know that she spent the vast majority of her childhood in the United States. And, looking back at the 70s and the country appointing a woman as a prime minister, so it might fit your collection, hopefully.
Golda, in her time as foreign minister, also did a huge amount in terms of Israel's role in the world as a global ambassador and bringing its gifts to Africa in terms of what it has to offer the world in terms of technology and innovation, was a particular part of her legacy that I think merits more attention and celebration. So I'm very appreciative of this gift. So thank you very much. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you.